Deep in the untamed wilderness of the American frontier, where mercy is as scarce as water in the desert, a heartless betrayal unfolds. A grieving widow and her innocent child, abandoned by their own flesh and blood, face certain death under the merciless sun. Their supposed protectors, her late husband's family, have left them to perish, driven by greed and malice. But fate has other plans. As vultures circle overhead and hope dwindles like the setting sun, a lone figure appears on the horizon. They call him the Ghost of the Prairie, a man who turned his back on civilization years ago. Now this reclusive cowboy must make a choice that will change 3 lives forever. With danger lurking in every shadow and family bonds transformed into deadly threats, one question remains. Can a man who has forsaken human connection open his heart to become the protector this small family desperately needs? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. 3 weeks earlier, Sarah Matthews stood before the aging mirror in her modest bedroom, her trembling fingers tracing the smooth gold of her wedding band. The morning light caught the worn edges where 6 years of marriage had softened its shine. Behind her, Emma slept peacefully, her small form rising and falling beneath the patchwork quilt Thomas had insisted they bring west from Pennsylvania. "Mama?" Emma's sleepy voice broke through Sarah's reverie. "Is Papa coming home today?" Sarah's heart clenched. How does one explain death to a child who still believes in forever? She turned from the mirror, forcing a gentle smile. "No, sweetheart. Remember what we talked about. Papa's gone to heaven now." Emma's lower lip quivered, but she nodded bravely. At 6 years old, she carried herself with a quiet dignity that reminded Sarah so much of Thomas, it hurt. But Grandfather Gerald said, "Papa would want us to be strong." Gerald Matthews. Sarah's fingers tightened around the ring. Her father-in-law's words had seemed comforting at the funeral 2 months ago, his weathered hand steady on her shoulder as they lowered Thomas into the hard Montana earth. But lately, something had changed in the old man's eyes when he looked at her, something calculating and cold that made her skin prickle. The sound of horses outside drew her attention. Through the window, she watched Gerald and his younger son Robert approaching the house, their expressions grim. The morning sun cast long shadows behind them, stretching like dark fingers across the yard. "Emma, darling, why don't you go play with your dolls in the kitchen? I need to speak with your grandfather." Sarah smoothed her daughter's unruly auburn curls, so like her own. "Yes, Mama." Emma gathered her rag doll, a birthday gift from Thomas last winter, and padded quietly from the room. Sarah straightened her simple black dress and made her way downstairs. The house creaked beneath her feet, each step a reminder of the home Thomas had built for them with his own hands, a home that, according to Gerald's recent hints, might not remain hers much longer. The knock came just as she reached the bottom step. She opened the door to find Gerald's imposing figure filling the frame, Robert's lanky form hovering behind him. "Sarah!" Gerald nodded curtly. "We need to discuss business." "Of course." She gestured them inside, noting how they tracked mud across the floor she'd scrubbed just yesterday. They settled in the sitting room, Gerald taking Thomas's chair without hesitation. The leather still bore the impression of her husband's form. "We've been patient," Gerald began, his voice carrying the authority of a man used to being obeyed. "Given you time to grieve, but certain matters can't be postponed indefinitely." Sarah's hands folded in her lap, knuckles white. "I understand. Thomas wouldn't want the ranch to suffer." "No, he wouldn't." Gerald leaned forward, and Sarah caught the faint smell of whiskey on his breath. "Which is why we've decided it's best if you and Emma return east to your family." The words hit her like a physical blow. I don't understand. This is our home. Thomas built this place with Matthew's money," Robert cut in, his tone sharp. "Family money. And now that Thomas is gone," Gerald continued, "it's time to be practical. A woman alone can't run a ranch. The bank's already asking questions about the mortgage. Sarah's mind raced. But Thomas said everything was paid for. He told me. Thomas said a lot of things. Gerald's voice hardened. But the papers tell a different story. Without a man to work this land, you'll lose it anyway. Better to let family handle things properly. The room seemed to shrink around her as understanding dawned. This had been their plan all along, waiting like vultures for the right moment to strike. She thought of Emma upstairs, of the life they'd built here, of Thomas's dreams for their future. "No," she said, surprising herself with the steadiness of her voice. "This is Emma's inheritance. I won't." "You don't have a choice." Gerald stood towering over her. "The deed's in the Matthews name. Always has been. We're offering to pay. You're way back east. That's more than generous considering..." "Considering what?" "Considering how much Thomas borrowed against the property. Debts you'd be responsible for now." Robert produced a stack of papers from his coat. "Unless you'd rather face the creditors alone." Sarah stared at the documents, her vision blurring. Thomas had told her everything was secure, had promised their future was settled. Had he lied? Or had his family found a way to twist things after his death? Through the window, she could hear Emma's soft singing from the kitchen. Her daughter's voice anchored her, gave her strength. "I need time to think," she managed, "to look over the papers." Gerald's smile didn't reach his eyes. "Of course, we'll return tomorrow. But Sarah?" He paused at the door. "Don't make this harder than it needs to be, not with a child to think about." The threat in his words was clear as prairie lightning. Sarah watched them ride away. Her wedding ring heavy on her finger. In the kitchen, Emma continued to sing, oblivious to how their world was crumbling. Sarah pressed her forehead against the cool window glass and closed her eyes, Thomas's voice echoing in her memory. "Whatever happens, love, never let them see you break." Long after Emma had fallen asleep, Sarah sat at the kitchen table. Thomas's strongbox opened before her. Her fingers traced the worn edges of documents by lamplight, searching for answers. The deed to the ranch lay in the center, its official seal mocking her with its apparent authenticity. But something wasn't right. The signature at the bottom, Thomas's signature, looked different from the one on their marriage certificate. Dawn was breaking when she heard horses approaching. She hadn't slept, and her eyes burned as she watched Gerald and Robert return, this time accompanied by the family's lawyer, Mr. Whitaker. The man's spectacles caught the morning light as he dismounted, his leather portfolio tucked under one arm. "Mrs. Matthews?" Whitaker nodded, removing his hat as he entered. His politeness felt like another weapon aimed at her. "I trust you've had time to consider the family's generous offer." Sarah laid out the documents she'd found. "These signatures don't match." A flicker of something, concern, fear, crossed Whitaker's face before his professional mask returned. "Grief can make us see things that aren't there, my dear." "Show me the original deed," Sarah demanded, "the one Thomas signed when he first bought the land." "Unfortunately," Gerald cut in, "that document was lost in last year's flood. The copy we have is perfectly legal." Robert shifted uncomfortably by the door, and Sarah caught the tell, the slight twitch of his mouth that always betrayed his lies, just as it had when they were children playing cards. She turned to Whitaker. "If Thomas owed so much money, there must be bank records. I want to see them." "Mrs. Matthews," Whitaker sighed, "you're only making this harder on yourself. And on Emma." The mention of her daughter made Sarah's spine stiffen. "What do you mean?" Gerald stepped forward, his shadow falling across the table. "The territories, no place for a woman alone. Accidents happen, bandits, wild animals. Who would protect you and the girl?" The threat hung in the air like smoke. Sarah thought of the neighbors, the closest miles away, and how isolated the ranch had become since Thomas's death. Even the hands had slowly drifted away, following Gerald's subtle suggestions that work might be more steady elsewhere. "The stagecoach leaves for Chicago on Thursday," Robert added almost gently. "We've already bought your tickets. And if I refuse," Gerald's voice turned to steel, "then you'll learn how dangerous this country can be for those without family protection." Upstairs, a floorboard creaked. Emma appeared at the top of the stairs, clutching her rag doll. "Mama!" "It's all right, sweetheart," Sarah called, her voice steady despite her racing heart. "Go back to your room. I'll be up soon." Gerald watched Emma disappear, then turned back to Sarah. "Think of your daughter. You have until tomorrow to pack what you can carry. We'll arrange for the rest to be sold." They left her standing in the kitchen, the forged deed still spread on the table. Through the window, she watched them ride away, their backs straight with the confidence of men who believed they'd won. But they hadn't seen what was hidden in the lining of Thomas's strongbox, the real property deed, along with letters detailing his suspicions about his family's schemes. Sarah gathered the documents with trembling hands. She needed help, but who could she trust? The sheriff was Gerald's drinking companion, the banker his cousin by marriage. Even the telegraph operator reported local gossip to Robert's wife. Emma's small feet padded down the stairs again. "Are we really leaving, Mama?" Sarah pulled her daughter close, breathing in the sweet scent of her hair. "We may have to take a little trip, darling, but I promise you we'll come back home." She spent the day packing carefully, clothes, food, Thomas's letters, and the real deed sewn into the hem of her dress. When darkness fell, she tucked Emma into bed one last time in her own room. Tomorrow they would board the stagecoach under Gerald's watchful eye, pretending to comply. But Sarah had seen the map in Thomas's strongbox, marking the old trails that led north. If they could slip away at the first stop, they might find help in the next town, where Gerald's influence didn't reach. What she didn't know, couldn't know, was that Gerald had already ensured they would never reach that first stop. Even now, Robert was bribing the stage driver, and a broken wagon wheel was being prepared, designed to fail at the most remote stretch of trail. The stagecoach rattled over rough terrain, each jolt making Emma clutch her ragdoll tighter. Sarah kept her daughter close, watching the familiar landscape roll past the window. They'd been traveling for hours, the morning sun now high overhead, baking the interior of the coach like an oven. Only one other passenger shared their journey, a sleeping elderly man who'd boarded at the last minute. Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that his presence was no coincidence, especially after catching him exchange a quick nod with Robert before departure. "Mama," Emma whispered, "Lucy's scared." She held up her rag doll, its worn fabric face somehow managing to look worried. The doll had been Emma's constant companion since Thomas gave it to her, and now it served as her way of expressing her own fears. "Tell Lucy there's nothing to be afraid of," Sarah murmured, though her own heart raced. They were far from the main road now, following a trail she didn't recognize. The driver had claimed it was a shortcut, but Sarah had seen enough of Gerald's schemes to know better. A sharp crack split the air, followed by the driver's shout. The stagecoach lurched violently, throwing them forward. Emma screamed as they tilted, the world spinning in a chaos of dust and splinters. When they finally stopped, the coach lay at an angle, one wheel completely shattered. The elderly passenger was gone. Had he jumped before the crash? Sarah checked Emma for injuries, finding only minor scrapes. Outside, the driver was already unhitching the horses, his movements too practiced, too calm. "Ladies," he called through the tilted door. "Afraid we've had an accident. Nearest station's about 20 miles back. I'll ride for help." Sarah's blood ran cold. 20 miles in this heat, with minimal water? She helped Emma out of the wreck, scanning the horizon. Nothing but empty prairie in every direction, the sun beating down mercilessly. "Our bags," Sarah said. But the driver was already mounting up, their luggage somehow secured to the second horse. "Can't risk overloading them in this heat," he said, not meeting her eyes. "I'll send help right back. Just stay with the coach." He spurred both horses before she could protest, disappearing into the shimming heat waves. Emma clutched Lucy tighter. "He's not coming back, is he, Mama?" Sarah knelt beside her daughter, brushing dust from her cheeks. "No, sweetheart, but we're not staying here either." She oriented herself by the sun, remembering Thomas's lessons about navigation. The nearest town had to be northeast, following the old buffalo trails. They salvaged what they could from the wreck. a canteen half full of warm water, Emma's shawl, for protection against the sun, and a small packet of bread that had fallen from their packed lunch. Sarah tore strips from her petticoat, wrapping them around their heads for protection against the relentless sun. "We're going on an adventure," she told Emma, trying to keep her voice light. "Like the explorers in your books. Lucy can help us. Look for landmarks." They started walking, Sarah setting a pace Emma could manage. The sun climbed higher, the heat becoming a living thing that pressed down on them with tangible weight. She made Emma sip water at regular intervals, though each time the canteen felt lighter sent panic through her chest. By mid-afternoon, Emma's steps had slowed to a shuffle. Her face was flushed despite the cloth covering, and Lucy dangled limply from her hand. Sarah carried her whenever she could, but her own strength was fading. The landmarks all looked the same, endless waves of grass and scattered rocks that shimmered in the heat. When Emma stumbled for the third time, Sarah knew they had to stop. A cluster of rocks offered meager shade, and she guided her daughter into their shadow. The canteen held only a few sips now. Above them, buzzards had begun to circle. "Tell me a story, Mama," Emma whispered, her voice cracked from thirst. She hugged Lucy close, the doll's faded dress dark with sweat. Sarah gathered her daughter in her arms, feeling the heat radiating from her small body. "Once there was a brave princess," she began, her throat tight, "who loved her papa very much. When he went to heaven, she and her mama had to go on a great journey." Emma's eyes fluttered closed as Sarah stroked her hair, praying for help she didn't believe would come. The buzzards circled lower, their shadows crossing the ground like nature's clock, counting down their remaining time. In the distance, heat waves danced across the prairie, transforming the landscape into a mockery of hope. Then through the rippling air, a shadow appeared, too solid to be another mirage. Sarah held her breath, watching it grow larger. A rider, moving fast and straight toward them. Friend or foe, it didn't matter anymore. Any human presence meant a chance at survival, though she clutched Thomas's hidden letters closer, knowing they were still their only hope for justice. The shadow grew clearer, and Sarah saw it was a man on horseback, his form silhouetted against the merciless sky like something out of a fever dream. She pulled Emma closer, feeling her daughter's ragged breathing against her chest, and waited to discover whether their salvation or doom approached across the burning prairie. The rider materialized from the heat waves like a phantom, his approach marked by the steady drumming of hoofbeats. As he drew closer, Sarah could make out the distinctive shape of a Winchester rifle mounted to his saddle, the weapon that had become as much a part of the frontier as the wild grass itself. He reined his horse to a stop several yards away, dust settling around him. The man sat tall in the saddle, his face shadowed by a worn cavalry hat. Years of sun and wind had weathered his features into something resembling the rocky terrain around them, but his eyes were sharp and alert as they took in the scene. "Ma'am," he said, his voice rough from disuse. The single word carried neither threat nor warmth. Sarah struggled to her feet, keeping Emma behind her. "Our stagecoach broke down," she managed, her throat painfully dry. "The driver went for help, but no stage runs this route." His statement was flat, matter of fact. The horse shifted beneath him, and Sarah caught glimpses of old scars on its flanks, a mount that had seen its share of trouble. Emma peered around Sarah's skirts, still clutching Lucy. The man's gaze softened almost imperceptibly at the sight of the child. He dismounted in one fluid motion, keeping his distance but reaching for a water skin at his saddle. "Drink," he said, tossing it carefully so it landed within Sarah's reach. Slowly. Sarah's hands shook as she uncorked the skin. She helped Emma drink first, measuring small sips, then took some herself. The water was warm but clean, and it took all her willpower not to gulp it down. "James Hawkins," the man offered, though he seemed to wrestle with whether to give his name at all. "My place is about 4 miles north. You can rest there until arrangements can be made." Sarah hesitated. Emma's fever was rising, and they had no real choice, but experience had taught her to be wary of strangers' kindness. "Why would you help us?" Something dark flickered across his face. "Because leaving you out here would be murder." He paused, studying the broken stagecoach in the distance. "Though that seems to have been someone's intention." A breeze stirred the grass, carrying the promise of evening. Emma swayed on her feet, and Sarah caught her before she fell. Without a word, Hawkins stepped forward and lifted the child into his arms, his movements gentle despite his weathered appearance. "I'll take her up first," he said, mounting smoothly while cradling Emma. "Then come back for you." Sarah watched as he settled her daughter securely in front of him, noting how naturally he adjusted his hold to support her fever-weakened form. The Winchester caught the late afternoon sun, its worn stock speaking of long use. A weapon maintained that well suggested a man who understood the difference between preparation and paranoia. "Your daughter will be safe," he said, reading her concern. "You have my word." Something in his tone, perhaps the way he said it like a binding contract rather than a casual reassurance, made Sarah believe him. She nodded, and he turned his horse north, Emma's head already drooping against his chest as exhaustion took over. Sarah waited in the meager shade of the rocks, watching their silhouette grow smaller against the burning sky. The buzzards had scattered at Hawkins' arrival, but she could still see them circling in the distance, as if waiting to see if their meal would be denied. True to his word, Hawkins returned within the hour. He helped her mount behind him without ceremony, his movements efficient and impersonal. As they rode, Sarah caught glimpses of the land through eyes trained to wariness, natural landmarks, changes in vegetation, subtle signs that marked the transition from open prairie to someone's territory. "They call you the ghost of the prairie," she said, remembering whispered conversations from town. "They say you appear and disappear like a spirit." "People talk too much," he replied, but there was no anger in his voice, only a tired acceptance of human nature. The sun was setting when a small homestead came into view, tucked into a natural fold in the land that made it nearly invisible, until you were upon it. A creek bubbled nearby, its banks lined with cottonwoods that offered blessed shade. The cabin itself was well maintained but modest, with a small corral and barn set back against a rise. Emma was sleeping inside, Hawkins told her as he helped her down. She'd taken more water and her fever had broken, but she needed rest. Sarah followed him into the cabin, noting the sparse but orderly interior. A single chair had been pulled. Up beside a narrow bed where Emma lay, Lucy still clutched in her arms. "Why did you really help us?" Sarah asked as Hawkins moved to leave them alone. He paused at the door, his hand resting on the frame. "Because 18 years ago, no one helped my wife and son when they needed it." Without another word, he stepped outside, leaving Sarah to watch over her sleeping daughter and wonder what kind of sanctuary they had found in this lonely corner of the prairie. The cabin's interior gradually revealed itself in the fading light. A single room divided by function rather than walls. A cast-iron stove occupied one corner, its pipe disappearing through the ceiling. Nearby, a rough-hewn table held a single plate and cup, emphasizing the solitary nature of its owner. But it was the photograph on the mantel that caught Sarah's attention. A weathered image of a woman and young boy standing before this very cabin, their smiles frozen in time. Hawkins moved through the space with the efficiency of long habit, lighting a lamp and setting water to boil. "There's a chest in the corner," he said, nodding toward a cedar box. "Might be something of my wife's that'll fit you." Sarah found a simple calico dress that smelled of cedar and memories. She changed behind a makeshift screen, grateful to be free of her dust-coated clothing. When she emerged, Hawkins was tending to Emma, his large hands surprisingly gentle as he checked her temperature. "Fever's down," he reported, "but she needs more than water. There's medicine in town." "Town?" Sarah's heart quickened. "How far?" "Half-day's ride. I'll go at first light." He straightened, avoiding the photograph's faded gaze. "You'll be safe here. Nobody comes this way." "Because of the rumors?" The words slipped out before she could stop them. A ghost of a smile touched his lips. Because I encouraged them. He moved to the stove, pouring hot water into cups and adding herbs that filled the air with a calming scent. Keeps curious folks away. Sarah accepted the tea, warming her hands around the cup. Like the story about you shooting a man for asking directions. Never shot anyone for asking directions. He paused. For other reasons, yes. The frank admission should have frightened her, but instead it felt oddly reassuring. Here was a man who dealt in truths, however harsh they might be. After months of Gerald's subtle manipulations and false smiles, the honesty was refreshing. Emma stirred on the bed, her eyes fluttering open. "Mama, I'm here, sweetheart." Sarah moved to her daughter's side, smoothing back sweat-dampened hair. "How do you feel?" "Thirsty." Emma's gaze drifted to Hawkins, who already had a cup of water ready. "Are you an angel?" The question seemed to startle him, an emotion flickering across his face too quick to name. "No, little one, just a man who found you and your mama in time." Emma sat up slowly, accepting the water. "Lucy says you're nice." She hugged her doll closer. "She knows about these things." Hawkins cleared his throat, clearly uncomfortable. "With the child's innocent trust. Your doll's smart to look after you." He reached for something on a shelf. "Might be she'd like to meet some friends." From a high shelf, he retrieved a small wooden horse, its surface smooth from years of handling. "My boys," he said quietly, offering it to Emma. He'd want someone to play with it. Sarah watched as her daughter carefully accepted the toy, her small fingers tracing the carved mane. "What was his name?" she asked softly. "Daniel." Hawkins turned away, busying himself with the stove. He'd be about 18 now. The weight of unspoken grief filled the cabin. Sarah looked again at the photograph, understanding now why it faced slightly away from the room's living spaces. Some memories were easier to honor from a distance. "You should rest," Hawkins said, his voice rough. "Both of you. I'll sleep in the barn." "Mr. Hawkins," Sarah called as he reached the door. "Thank you." Not everyone would have stopped. He paused, one hand on the doorframe. "Most folks call me Ghost," he said, "but James will do." Without another word, he stepped into the gathering. Darkness, leaving Sarah and Emma in the lamplit sanctuary of his solitary world. Later, after Emma had drifted back to sleep with the wooden horse tucked beside Lucy, Sarah stood at the window. The moon had risen, casting silver light across the prairie. In its glow, she could see James sitting on the cabin's single step, his Winchester across his knees as he kept watch over his unexpected guests. She touched the photograph on the mantel gently, wondering what confluence of tragedy and circumstance had led them all to this moment. Outside, an owl called into the night, its cry echoing across the empty prairie, like a reminder that even in the wildest places, no soul was meant to remain completely alone. The old medical kit lay open on the table, its leather worn smooth by years of use. Sarah watched through fever-blurred vision as James sorted through its contents with practiced hands. Her own fever had risen suddenly in the night, her body finally surrendering to the strain of their ordeal. "Military issue," he explained, selecting a small bottle. "From my time in the cavalry, never know when you'll need it out here." The lamplight caught the edges of old scars on his hands as he measured out the medicine. Through the haze of fever, Sarah drifted between past and present. One moment she was watching James tend to her. The next, she was back at the ranch. Thomas's voice echoing in her ears. "Don't trust them, love," he whispered. "My father will never forgive me for choosing my own path." "Easy now." James's voice drew her back. "Medicine's bitter, but it'll help." His calloused hand supported her head as she drank, the gesture careful, almost tentative, as if he'd forgotten how to offer comfort. Emma hovered nearby, Lucy clutched in one arm, the wooden horse in the other. "Is Mama going to be all right?" "Your Mama's strong," James assured her, his gruff voice gentling. "Just needs rest, like you did." He turned back to Sarah, his expression troubled. "The fever's making you remember things you might not want to share." Sarah realized she must have been speaking her thoughts aloud. "They killed him," she whispered. "Thomas, the accident at the mill." "It wasn't an accident." James's hands stilled over the medical kit. "You're sure?" "Found letters in his strongbox. He knew they were stealing from the ranch. Confronted them." The words slipped out between waves of fever, secrets she'd carried too long burning their way free. Emma's small voice cut through the delirium. "Mama, you're scaring me." "Here now," James said, lifting Emma onto the bed beside Sarah. "Your mama just needs sleep. Why don't you tell her about the birds we saw this morning?" Emma settled against the headboard, her presence anchoring Sarah to the present. "Mr. James showed me baby sparrows in the barn," she began, her voice taking on the storytelling lilt she'd inherited from Thomas. "Their mama brings them worms and—" Sarah drifted in and out of consciousness, aware of Emma's steady stream, of chatter, of James's quiet movements around the cabin. Sometimes she'd wake to find fresh water by the bed, or feel a cool cloth on her forehead. Once, through half-closed eyes, she saw James sitting in the cabin's single chair, cleaning his Winchester, while Emma slept curled at her side. Her dreams were fever-twisted memories. Gerald's face morphing into a vulture's, Robert's hands stained with ink as he forged Thomas's signature, the mill wheel turning red with blood. She cried out once, fighting phantom hands that tried to drag her from the bed. "You're safe," James's voice cut through the nightmare. "Emma's safe. No one's coming near either of you." The conviction in his words reached past the fever, settling something deep in her chest. Sarah forced her eyes open, finding his face close to hers in the lamplight. "Why do you live alone out here?" A shadow crossed his features. "Same reason. As you're running, some things a person can't face without changing who they are." "And who are you?" "Someone who learned too late that justice and law aren't always the same thing." He turned away, but not before Sarah caught the deep well of pain in his eyes. "Rest now. Fever's breaking." She slept again. But this time the dreams were different. She was standing in a sunlit field, Thomas beside her, his smile as warm as she remembered. "You found help, love," he said. "Now let him find his way back too." When Sarah woke fully, sunlight was streaming through the cabin's windows. Emma was gone, but she could hear her daughter's laughter floating in from outside. Pushing herself up, she made her way to the door on shaky legs. Emma was in the barn doorway, watching in delight as James showed her how to feed the Sparrow family without frightening them. Lucy and the wooden horse sat carefully arranged on a hay bale, as if supervising the lesson. The morning light caught James's profile, and for a moment Sarah saw past the hardened exterior to the man he must have been before loss rewrote his story. He looked up, catching her watching. "Should be in bed," he called, but there was no real reproach in his voice. "Thank you," she said simply, "for everything." He nodded once, then turned back to Emma's eager questions about the birds. But something had shifted, like a door long rusted shut, starting to remember how to open. Gerald Matthews stood in the sheriff's office, his imposing figure casting a long shadow across the wanted poster he'd just nailed to the wall. Sarah's face stared back at him, the artist's sketch making her look harder than she was, more desperate. Below the image, bold letters spelled out, "Wanted for questioning, Sarah Matthews and child, Emma Matthews. Reward offered for information leading to their safe return." "Ain't right," Deputy Wilson muttered, studying the poster. "Using official. Channels for a family matter." Gerald's voice carried the weight of his influence. "A woman stealing away with a child in the dead of night, taking documents that don't belong to her. That's more than a family matter, Deputy." The young lawman shifted uncomfortably. "Still no sign of the stage driver?" "Man's probably halfway. To Mexico with our money." Robert entered the office, bringing the smell of trail dust with him. Found the coach, where he said, "But no bodies." He caught himself. No sign of them. Gerald's jaw tightened. Things weren't going according to plan. The driver was supposed to leave them far enough out to ensure they'd never make it back, but not so far that their bodies wouldn't be found. A grieving widow and child, lost to the prairie's cruel embrace. It would have been a tragic tale, but one that would have sealed the ranch's fate cleanly. "I want riders checking every homestead within 50 miles, Gerald ordered. "Someone must have seen something." The deputy hesitated. "That's a lot of territory, Mr. Matthews, and some folks out there don't take kindly to questions." "Then double the reward." Gerald pulled out his wallet, counting bills onto the desk. "And make sure people understand. This is about bringing a confused, grieving woman and her child home safely. Nothing more." Robert watched their performance with barely concealed distaste. He'd gone along with his father's schemes for years, telling himself it was for the family's good. But something about Sarah's quiet strength had started eating at him, making him question everything they'd done since Thomas's death. Outside the sheriff's office, the town was coming alive with morning activity. Gerald watched the gathering crowd with satisfaction as they noticed the poster, whispers already spreading like wildfire. Sarah wouldn't be able to hide for long, not with every desperate soul in the territory looking for easy money. "What if she has proof?" Robert asked quietly. "About Thomas?" Gerald's face hardened. "Then we'd better pray she doesn't live to show it." He mounted his horse, addressing the growing crowd. "My daughter-in-law's not well, folks. Grief can do terrible things to a person's mind. She's taken my granddaughter into dangerous territory. Any help finding them will be well rewarded." Sympathetic murmurs rippled through the crowd. Gerald had spent years cultivating his image as a concerned patriarch, and now that investment was paying off. Nobody questioned why a woman would flee, in the night, taking only her child and a few possessions. Nobody wondered about the timing of Thomas's accident or how the Matthews family had consolidated their power in the years since. But as Gerald rode out of town, Robert lingering behind, one figure watched from the shadows of the general store. Joe Running Bear, Thomas's old friend from their school days, studied the wanted poster with knowing eyes. He'd been away when Thomas died, but the letters his friend had sent him told a different story than the one Gerald was spinning. Joe slipped away from the crowd, making his way to the livery stable where his horse waited. He knew these lands better than any of Gerald's men, and he had a fair idea where a woman and child might have found shelter. The ghost of the prairie might be just a legend to most, but Joe knew the man behind the stories. More importantly, he knew why James Hawkins had chosen isolation over justice all those years ago. As Joe rode out of town, taking a trail that would leave no tracks, he carried with him the weight of an old promise. "Watch over my family if anything happens to me," Thomas had written in his last letter. "The truth about Father is worse than we thought." The wanted poster fluttered in the morning breeze, its edges curling as if trying to reveal the lies hidden beneath its official-looking surface. All across town, copies were being posted, each one drawing the noose tighter around Sarah and Emma's sanctuary. The race to find them had begun, and with it, the chance that old wounds and buried truths would finally see the light of day. The morning sun cast long shadows across the homestead as James led a dappled mare from the barn, Emma watching with wide-eyed wonder. In his hands he held a small wooden horse, freshly carved, its surface still showing the marks of his knife. "Every rider needs a horse of her own," he said, offering both the carving and the mare's reins to Emma. "This one's called Star, on account of the mark on her forehead. Gentlest horse I've ever known." Emma clutched Lucy tighter with one hand, while reaching for the wooden horse with the other. "She's beautiful," she breathed, looking between the carving and the real animal. "But Mama says I'm too little to ride alone. That's why we start with lessons." James lifted her easily, settling her on Star's back. "Your Mama's watching from the porch, see? We'll just walk the yard today." Sarah stood in the doorway, her heart catching at the sight. James moved beside Star with the patience of a born teacher, one hand steady on Emma's back, the other holding the reins as he explained the basics of balance and posture. Her daughter's laughter, so rare since Thomas's death, floated across the morning air. "She needs this," Sarah said softly when James led Star back to the starting point. "Normal things. After everything, children are stronger than we think." James replied, his voice gentle. But they need to be children, even in hard times. He glanced at her, maybe especially then. Emma's next circuit brought more confidence, her small hands gripping the saddle horn, just as James had shown her. The wooden horse peeked from her pocket, its carved mane catching the sunlight. "Look, Mama, I'm doing it." "You surely are, sweetheart." Sarah blinked back unexpected tears. How long had it been since she'd seen her daughter so carefree? James must have noticed her emotion because he handed her a worn handkerchief without comment. "Barn needs sweeping," he said gruffly, as if to counter his own kindness. "Could use some help if you're feeling stronger." She understood his offer for what it was, a chance to work alongside him, to feel useful rather than helpless. They fell into an easy rhythm, James clearing old hay while Sarah swept, Emma's voice drifting in from outside as she talked to Star. "Your husband taught you ranch work?" James asked during a pause. Sarah nodded, leaning on her broom. Thomas believed. "A woman should know everything about running the place. Said you never know when knowledge might mean survival." Her voice caught. He was right about so many things. James studied her for a moment. "You think his death wasn't an accident?" "I know it wasn't." She met his gaze steadily. "Just like, I suspect you know something about justice denied." He turned away, but not before she saw the old pain surface in his eyes. "Justice is a fancy word for revenge sometimes. Doesn't always bring peace." "What brings peace then?" "Haven't figured that part out yet." He reached up to the barn's rafters, bringing down another wooden horse, older than the one he'd given Emma. "Daniel carved this one. Summer before." He trailed off, running his thumb over the worn surface. Sarah touched his arm gently. "Thank you for sharing it with her. For sharing all of this." Their eyes met, and something shifted in the space between them. An understanding born of shared loss and unexpected trust. The moment broke as Emma's voice called from outside. "Mr. James, Star found something." They emerged to find Emma, still mounted, pointing excitedly toward the creek. A deer and her fawn had emerged from the brush, drinking cautiously from the clear water. "Stay still now," James murmured, moving closer to Star. "Let them be, and they might stay a while." Emma held her breath, watching in wonder as the fawn took tentative steps after its mother. The wooden horse in her pocket seemed to take on new meaning, a talisman of this moment, of safety found in unexpected places. Later, as James taught Emma how to brush down Star after her ride, Sarah caught him smiling. A real smile that softened the hard edges of his face. He felt her watching and straightened, trying to recover his usual stoic expression. But something had changed. The ghost of the prairie was becoming human again, one small moment at a time. That evening, Emma arranged her growing collection of wooden horses on the cabin's windowsill. The old one of Daniel's, her new one from James, and a smaller one she'd found tucked away in a drawer, which Sarah suspected might have belonged to James himself as a boy. Together, they told a story of 3 lives intersecting, of healing found in the sharing of cherished things. The old newspaper lay between them on the table, its yellowed pages brittle with age. The headline stood stark against the faded paper: "Local ranch family murdered. No suspects found." Sarah's fingers traced the date. 18 years ago, almost. To the day. "I was away," James said, his voice barely above a whisper. "Army patrol." Catherine had written about strangers asking questions, men watching the ranch. "I didn't get back in time." Through the cabin's window, they could see Emma in the yard, teaching Lucy and her wooden horses the proper way to groom Star, mimicking the lessons James had given her. The evening light painted everything in soft gold, making the scene almost painfully beautiful. "The investigation?" Sarah asked gently. "Sheriff said it was bandits. Random violence." James's laugh held no humor. "Nothing random about it. Catherine had proof that the territory's biggest rancher was running cattle off small homesteaders' land, forging deeds, forcing families out." His hands clenched. "Same things your father-in-law's doing now." Sarah's breath caught. "You knew?" About Gerald? Man like that, his reputation travels. When Thomas started asking questions in town last year, I recognized the pattern. He met her eyes. Should have done something then. Maybe your husband would still be alive. You can't blame yourself for what they did. Sarah touched his hand. Briefly. Thomas made his choice to stand up to them, just like Catherine did. James stood abruptly, moving to the window. Catherine kept everything, every piece of evidence, every threatening note. Had it all ready for the territorial marshal. His voice roughened, found it all burned, along with... Sarah joined him at the window, watching Emma's innocent play. What did you do? What the law wouldn't. Tracked them down one by one. Not all deaths in the territory that year were natural. He turned to her, eyes haunted. But it didn't bring them back. Just turned me into something else, something Daniel wouldn't have recognized. Is that why you stayed out here? To punish yourself? To remember? And to watch? Make sure it didn't happen again? He nodded toward Emma. Your girl reminds me of Daniel. Same way of seeing good in everything. A floorboard creaked, and they turned to find Emma in the doorway, her face serious. Mr. James? Stars making funny noises. The shift in James was immediate, personal demons set aside in favor of practical concerns. Might be colic. Better check on her. He headed for the door, then paused. Sarah, sometimes remembering isn't enough. Sometimes you have to act. After he left, Sarah returned to the newspaper. Below the headline was a smaller photo, a young James Hawkins in military uniform, standing proud beside his wife and son. Their smiles seemed to reach across time, making the tragedy to come even more heartbreaking. Emma climbed into her lap, pointing at the picture. They look happy. They were, sweetheart. Sarah hugged her daughter close, just like we were with Papa. Are we going to be happy again? The question hung in the air as they heard James's voice from the barn, talking soothingly to Star. Through the window, Sarah could see him working with quiet efficiency, his movements sure, despite the growing darkness. I think we might be, she answered finally. Different than before, but yes. Later, after Emma was asleep, Sarah found James still in the barn. He was sitting on a hay bale, holding something in his hands, a small tin-type photograph, too worn to make out clearly. Catherine took it, he said without looking up. Day Daniel learned to ride. Kept it in my wallet all these years. Sarah sat beside him, their shoulders barely touching. Tell me about them. And there in the darkness, surrounded by the soft sounds of horses and the distant cry of nighthawks, James began to speak. He told her of Catherine's laugh and Daniel's endless questions, of picnics by the creek and dreams of a future they'd never see. With each word, the weight he'd carried seemed to shift, not lifting entirely, but perhaps becoming more bearable for being shared. The newspaper article lay forgotten on the cabin table, its grim headlines overshadowed by the stories of love and life that had come before the tragedy. Outside, the prairie wind whispered through the grass, carrying with it the promise that even the deepest wounds could heal, given time and trust enough to try. The anonymous letter arrived with Joe running, bare just before dawn, carried through the last shadows of night. James met him at the edge of the property, their conversation brief and tense. When James returned to the cabin, Sarah knew from his expression that their peaceful interlude was ending. Gerald's got search parties combing the territory, he said, placing the crumpled note on the table. Offering rewards, making you out to be unstable, dangerous to Emma. Sarah smoothed the paper, reading the hastily scrawled warning. Her hands trembled at the sight of Robert's distinctive handwriting, disguised but still recognizable. He's trying to turn the whole territory against us. Man like Gerald Matthews has resources. James checked his Winchester. The familiar, motion almost unconscious. Won't take long for someone to remember stories about a hermit living out this way. Through the bedroom doorway, they could see Emma still sleeping, Lucy and the wooden horses standing guard on the windowsill. The morning light hadn't reached her corner yet, leaving her in peaceful shadow. Joe says they're searching methodically, spiral pattern moving outward from town. James's voice was tight with controlled urgency. We've got maybe 2 days before they reach this area, less if someone talks. Sarah clutched the letter. We can't run again. Emma's just starting to feel safe. No, James agreed, surprising her. Running's not the answer this time. He moved to the cabin's single shelf, pulling down a battered tin box. Time to face them, but we do it smart. The box contained papers, yellowed but carefully preserved. Catherine's evidence, he explained, about the land grabs 18 years ago. Patterns the same. Forged deeds pressure families to sell accidents for those who refuse. His jaw tightened. Your husband saw it. That's why they killed him. Thomas's letters, Sarah said suddenly. In my dressroom, they prove Gerald was. Stealing from the ranch, falsifying records. She met James's eyes. Together with Catherine's evidence, might be enough to interest the territorial marshal. James nodded. Joe's riding to Fort Laramie today, but it'll take time for the law to move. Time we don't have. Then we make our stand here. James's voice held the calm certainty of a man who'd faced impossible odds before. This land's good for defense. Natural barriers, clear lines of sight. I've spent years making it ready, just in case. Sarah studied his face in the growing light. You knew this day might come. Hoped it wouldn't. He touched the letter gently. But Robert's warning gives us a chance, time to prepare. They spent the morning making plans. James showed Sarah the hidden routes off the property, the caches of supplies, the signals they would use. Every preparation bore the mark of a military mind that had never stopped planning for siege. Emma woke to find them calculating ammunition stores. She watched solemnly as James taught Sarah to load and fire his spare rifle, her small face understanding more than they wished she could. Are the bad men coming? She asked during a break, clutching Lucy closer. James knelt before her, his weathered face gentle. Some men might come looking for you and your mama. But I promise you, Emma, they won't get near either of you. Like you protected your family. The innocent question hit him like a physical blow. Sarah saw him flinch, saw the old guilt surface in his eyes. But when he spoke, his voice was steady. I wasn't here to protect them then. But I'm here now, and this time will be different. Emma studied him with that deep wisdom some children possess. Then she retrieved something from the windowsill, Daniel's carved horse. Lucy says this is magic. It keeps people safe. James took the offering with hands that trembled slightly. Then we'll keep it close. The day passed in careful preparation. They moved supplies to the storm cellar, established fallback positions, planned for every contingency. As dusk approached, James led them to a hidden viewpoint that overlooked the surrounding prairie. Watch how the grass moves, he instructed. It'll tell you when riders are coming long before you see them. Sarah felt Emma's small hand slip into hers as they watched the wind paint patterns in the tall grass. Behind them, James stood like a sentinel, his Winchester ready, but not yet. Needed. The anonymous letter had changed everything, transforming their sanctuary into a fortress. Yet somehow Sarah felt stronger here than she had running. We'll face them together, she said softly. James's reply was almost lost in the evening wind. Together, he echoed, the word carrying the weight of a vow. As darkness fell, they returned to the cabin. Emma arranged her wooden horses in a protective circle around Lucy before sleep, while Sarah and James took turns at watch. The letter lay on the table between them, its warning now a promise of battles to come. But for the first time since Thomas's death, Sarah felt the stirring of something beyond mere survival, the fierce determination of those who had found something worth fighting for. The broken fence post lay splintered in the dawn light, its jagged edges marking the first violation of James's territory. He stood over it now, reading signs most men would miss. Fresh horse tracks, a spent match, shadows of men trying to move. Unseen through his land, for riders, he murmured to Sarah, who stood ready with his spare rifle. Testing our defenses. They'd spotted the search party's dust on the horizon an hour earlier, exactly as James had taught them to watch for. Emma was already secure in the storm cellar, Lucy and her wooden horses keeping her company in the hidden space beneath the barn. "Gerald's men?" Sarah asked, her voice steady despite the fear churning in her stomach. "Hired guns. See how they split up, military precision." James's eyes narrowed. "Gerald's spending good money." The morning mist still clung to the low places, providing cover that worked both for and against them. Sarah could hear horses moving through the fog, trying to circle the property. James had predicted this. It's why they'd left the broken fence. Post visible. Let them think they'd found a weakness. "Remember what I taught you," James said softly. "No shooting unless there's no choice. Sometimes the threat of a bullet works better than the bullet itself." A horse whinnied somewhere to their left, followed by a curse as its rider encountered one of James's carefully placed obstacles, wooden stakes hidden in the tall grass, harmless to wildlife, but treacherous to mounted men. "That'll keep them honest." James allowed himself a grim smile. "Make them think twice about rushing in." The first rider appeared through the mist like a ghost, rifle ready but pointed downward. His clothes marked him as a professional, no flash, no unnecessary movement. He reined his horse to a stop just within speaking distance. "That's far enough," James called, his voice carrying the authority of a man defending his own land. The rider held up one hand, keeping the other visible on his saddle horn. "Looking for a woman and child. Might have passed this way." "Might have," James agreed neutrally. "Lot of folks pass through. Most know better than to stay." A second rider materialized from the fog, then a third. The fourth, Sarah realized, was keeping hidden, probably with a clear shot if things went wrong, just as James had warned her they would. "Got reward money for information?" the first rider continued. $500. "Good money for just pointing us the right way. Must be important folks, offering that kind of reward." Gerald Matthews is a concerned grandfather. The rider's voice hardened slightly. "Wants his family back safe." Sarah's finger tensed on her rifle's trigger, but James's slight headshake steadied her. "Let them talk. Let them wonder what they're really facing." "Heard about that," James said conversationally. "Also heard his son died under questionable circumstances. Heard the widow might have papers proving something interesting about that death." The riders shifted uneasily. The first man's casual pose became more alert. "Might be best if you just and tell us if you've seen them. Might be best if you ride out now while you can." James's voice lost all pretense of friendliness. "Next time I see riders on my land, I won't be so hospitable." The threat hung in the air like gun smoke. The riders looked at each other, measuring the steel in James's voice against their pay. The first man studied the property again, taking in the defensive positions, the clear fields of fire, the obvious preparation for trouble. "Could come back with more men," he offered almost regretfully. "Could." James smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Won't change the outcome, just the body count." Something in his tone, the absolute certainty, the hint of a man who'd dealt death before, made the riders hesitate. The first man nodded slowly, a professional acknowledging another professional. "Your choice," he said, wheeling his horse, "but Mr. Matthews isn't a man to cross." "Neither am I." They watched the riders disappear into the mist, taking their time, making it clear they weren't running. When the last hoof-beat faded, Sarah let out a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. "They'll be back," she said. "Yes." James was already moving, checking the property's defenses. "But now they know this won't be easy. They'll have to decide if it's worth the risk." Sarah helped him reset the stakes, repair the fence post. They worked in comfortable silence, both understanding that this was just the beginning. In the barn, they could hear Emma's soft voice drifting up from the storm cellar, telling Lucy about the brave ghost who protected them. "We should move her," Sarah said quietly. "Find somewhere safer." James paused in his work, looking at her directly. "Sometimes running isn't the answer. Sometimes you have to stand and fight for what matters." His hand brushed hers briefly. "You and Emma, you matter." The words hung between them, heavy with meaning neither was ready to fully acknowledge. Instead, they returned to their preparations, knowing that somewhere out there, Gerald Matthews was about to learn that his money had brought him nothing but a warning. The ghost of the prairie was no longer content to simply watch injustice unfold. Thomas's real will emerged from its hiding place in Sarah's dress hem like a butterfly from a chrysalis, the paper soft and worn from constant contact. James spread it carefully on the table beside Catherine's evidence, the two sets of documents telling the same story across 18 years. See the pattern? James traced the dates with a weathered finger. Every time a small rancher struck silver or copper, Gerald's name appeared on their deed within months. Always after an accident or a sudden departure. Sarah's hands trembled as she unfolded Thomas's last letter to her. The silver vein Thomas found last spring. He told Gerald it was just a small strike, but your husband knew better. James nodded. Same as Catherine did when she found copper on our land. A horse's whinny from outside drew their attention. Joe Running Bear dismounted in the yard, his expression grave as he entered the cabin. Sheriff's finally asking questions, he reported. Too many similarities between Thomas's death and old accidents. Deputy Wilson's been going through records. James's face tightened. Gerald knows. Sent Robert to handle it. Joe set his hat on the table. But Robert's changed since Sarah left, spending a lot of time in the sheriff's office, looking at old files. Sarah remembered Robert's anonymous warning letter, his uncomfortable shifts when Gerald spoke of Thomas's death. He knows the truth. He's known all along. Man can only carry so much guilt, Joe agreed. Question is, will he act on it? As if in answer, hoofbeats approached at a gallop. James had his Winchester ready before the rider emerged from the morning mist. Robert Matthews, riding hard and alone. Don't shoot! He raised his hands, showing he was unarmed. Sarah! I brought proof. James kept his rifle trained as Sarah stepped onto the porch. Robert's face was streaked with trail dust and something else, fear or maybe relief. Why now? Sarah demanded. Because I watched my father kill my brother. Robert's voice broke. Because I can't let him destroy another family. He reached slowly into his jacket, withdrawing a packet of papers. Thomas's real mining claim, father's letters ordering the mill's sabotage. Bank records showing how he's been stealing from every ranch he's taken. The documents felt like live coals in Sarah's hands. Here was everything Thomas had died trying to prove, delivered by the very man who had helped hide the truth. Sheriffs deputized a dozen men, Robert continued urgently. Father's gathering his own force. You need to get these to the territorial marshal now, before... A shot cracked across the morning air. Robert jerked, surprise replacing relief on his face. As he toppled from his saddle, more shots followed, kicking up dirt around them as James pulled Sarah to safety. Riders coming, Joe called from his watchpost. At least 15. James was already moving, his military training evident in every motion. Get Emma from the cellar. We'll take the back trail to Fort Laramie. Sarah clutched the evidence to her chest as she ran for the barn. A stray bullet splintered the doorframe beside her, but she didn't slow. Emma was already climbing out of the cellar, Joe's warning shot having triggered their practiced escape plan. Lucy's scared, Emma whispered as Sarah lifted her onto Stars. Back. Then we'll have to be brave for her. Sarah mounted behind her daughter, feeling James press Thomas's letters and Robert's proof into her saddlebag. Joe and I will hold them here, James said, his hand lingering on Sarah's knee. Give you time to reach the fort. His eyes met hers, saying everything they hadn't found words for yet. We'll bring help, Sarah promised. I know. He stepped. Back, rifle ready. Now ride. Don't look back. They broke from the barn at a gallop. Emma clutched tight against her as Star carried them toward the creek trail. Behind them, gunfire erupted in earnest as Gerald's men engaged with James and Joe. Sarah forced herself not to turn at the sound of fighting. In her saddlebag, Thomas's true will and Robert's evidence bounced with each stride. Their weight finally shifted from burden to weapon. Somewhere ahead lay Fort Laramie and the Territorial, Marshall. Somewhere behind, two men who had lost families to Gerald Matthews's greed now fought to protect her and Emma from the same fate. The morning sun broke through the mist as they rode, lighting their way toward justice or doom. Emma's small hands gripped Star's mane, Lucy and her wooden horse safely tucked in her pocket. "Will Mr. James be all right?" she asked over the thunder of hoofbeats. Sarah thought of the steel in James's eyes. The weight of 18 years of waiting finally lifted by the chance to act. "He will," she said, and prayed she spoke truth. "He has something worth fighting for now." The storm lantern cast wild shadows. As Sarah and Emma huddled in the abandoned line shack, night had fallen too quickly, forcing them to take shelter when Star picked up a stone bruise. Outside, thunder growled across the prairie like distant gunfire, each rumble making Emma clutch Lucy tighter. "How far to Fort Laramie?" Emma whispered, her face pale in the lantern light. "Another day's ride." Sarah checked Star's hoof again, her hands gentle on the warm flesh. The stone had worked free, but the mare needed rest, time they didn't have. A real gunshot cut through the storm's voice, closer than comfort. Sarah doused the lantern immediately, gathering Emma into her arms as darkness swallowed them. Through the shack's single window, lightning revealed mounted figures moving through the rain. "Found tracks leading this way!" A voice carried on the wind. "Spread out and search!" Sarah's heart pounded as she recognized Gerald's voice. He'd split his forces, sending only part to attack the homestead while he personally led the pursuit. Now he was between them and Fort Laramie, between them and help. Emma didn't make a sound, understanding without being told the need for absolute silence. She pressed Lucy against her chest, the wooden horse still tucked safely in her pocket. Sarah felt her daughter trembling and pulled her closer, trying to share warmth and courage. Hoofbeats approached the shack. Lightning flashed again, and for an instant Gerald's shadow loomed huge against the wall. "Sarah!" His voice carried false concern. "Think of Emma. You're putting her in danger." The irony of his words might have made her laugh if fear hadn't closed her throat. Through the gaps in the shack's walls, she could see lanterns moving, searching. They were surrounded. "The storm's getting worse," Gerald called. "Let us take you home where it's safe." Home. The word struck her like a physical blow. There, home was back at James's cabin, where even now he and Joe might be fighting for their lives. Or worse. Thunder crashed overhead, and in that moment of natural violence, Sarah heard it, the distinctive sound of James's Winchester far behind them. He was alive, still fighting, still giving them a chance. More riders approached the shack. Found. "Fresh horse tracks, Mr. Matthews, leading away north toward the fort." "Follow them," Gerald ordered. "The rest of you, keep searching here." Sarah held her breath as horses galloped past their hiding place. Joe had shown her how to leave false trails, taught her tricks learned from years of tracking. Now those lessons might save their lives. Minutes stretched like hours as they waited, Emma's small form growing heavier in Sarah's arms as exhaustion took hold. The storm's fury began to pass, leaving only steady rain and occasional rumbles of distant thunder. "Clear here, Mr. Matthews," a voice called. "No sign of them." "They have to be somewhere." Gerald's frustration was evident. "Keep looking. They couldn't have gotten far in this weather." More hoofbeats splashed through mud, moving away. Sarah counted seconds, then minutes, straining to hear any sound of remaining searchers. Finally, when the night held only rain and wind, she dared to breathe normally again. "Mama?" Emma's whisper was barely audible. "I'm scared." "I know, sweetheart." Sarah kissed her daughter's forehead. "But being scared doesn't matter. What matters is what we do about it." Emma was quiet for a moment. "Like Mr. James? He gets scared too, but he's brave anyway." Exactly like that. Sarah thought of James facing down Gerald's men, buying them. Time with his courage and skill. Sometimes being brave means doing what's right, even when you're frightened. The storm lantern, though unlit, was still warm when Sarah touched it. In the darkness, it represented their choices: stay hidden and safe, or risk the light and make a run for Fort Laramie and justice. Star nickered softly from where she was tied outside, sensing other horses in the distance. They couldn't stay here. Gerald's men would return at first light, making a more thorough search. "Emma," Sarah whispered, "remember how Papa used to say that sometimes you have to make your own luck?" She felt her daughter nod against her chest. "Well, that's what we're going to do." The storm scattered Gerald's men. "They'll expect us to wait it out, to hide until morning." Sarah retrieved Thomas's letters and Robert's evidence from her saddlebag, keeping them dry against her skin. "So we're going to ride now, in the dark, while they're still searching the wrong places. Through the storm?" Emma's voice shook slightly. "Through the storm." Sarah packed quickly, efficiently. "The rain will hide our tracks, and the darkness will be our friend. Can you be brave a little longer?" Emma straightened, and even in the darkness, Sarah could sense her daughter's determination. "Lucy says we can do it. Lucy's very wise." Sarah helped Emma mount Star, then swung up behind her. The mare's hoof seemed better after its rest, and the cool rain would help any lingering soreness. They set out into the night, moving slowly at first, until their eyes adjusted to the darkness. The storm's remnants provided cover, while distant lightning showed them the way. Behind them, Gerald's men continued their fruitless search, while, somewhere back at James's homestead, shots still echoed occasionally through the rain. Sarah pressed Thomas's letters closer to her heart, feeling their weight like a compass pointing toward justice. Dawn would find them either at Fort Laramie, with help, or caught in Gerald's trap. But for now, they rode through darkness toward hope. 3 small figures against the vast prairie night, a mother, a child, and a faithful mare, carrying their courage and their proof through the storm. The territorial marshal's badge caught the morning sun as he read through the evidence, each page turning with deliberate care. Behind him, Fort Laramie's walls offered protection, while Sarah watched his face for any reaction. Emma slept in a nearby cot, exhausted from their night ride through the storm. "Thomas Matthews was a good man," Marshal Davis said finally, setting down Robert's confession. "Served on my posse once, tracking bank robbers. Never thought his own father would—" He shook his head, badge glinting as he stood. "You've given us enough to hang Gerald Matthews 10 times over." Sarah's hands trembled with exhaustion and relief. "There are men fighting at James Hawkins' homestead. They need help. Already dispatched a squad when you arrived?" Davis checked. His pocket watch. "Should be there by now. Your friend Hawkins, he's the one they used to call the Ghost." "Yes." The marshal nodded thoughtfully. "Heard stories about him over the years. Man who lost everything, turned vigilante. Never could prove anything, but some of the territory's worst men met unfortunate ends after crossing his path." He studied Sarah. Interesting that he chose to stand and fight this time instead of striking from the shadows. He had something worth fighting for, Sarah said quietly. A commotion outside drew their attention. Riders were approaching the fort at speed, the guards calling out recognition signals. Sarah hurried to the window, her heart leaping as she recognized James's tall figure among them, Joe running bare at his side. They were battered but alive, their clothes showing signs of hard fighting. James's face bore fresh cuts, and Joe's arm was bandaged, but their eyes held the fierce satisfaction of men who'd won their battle. "Gerald?" Sarah asked as James entered the marshal's office. "Caught between us and the law." James nodded to Davis. "Your men arrived just as he was trying to flank our position. He's in custody, along with most of his hired guns." The marshal's badge seemed to carry extra weight as Davis pinned it back on his coat. "And the rest won't be causing more trouble." James's voice held no apology. "Some fights end only one way." Davis studied him for a long moment, then nodded. "Territory's a safer place today. Think I'll focus on that part in my report." Emma stirred on her cot, blinking at the voices. When she saw James, her face lit up. "You came. Promised I would, didn't I?" His gruff voice softened as she ran. "To hug him. Lucy, keep you safe through the storm. She helped me be brave." Emma pulled the wooden horse from her pocket. "This too." Sarah watched James lift her daughter, saw how naturally they fit together now, the lonely man and the child who'd helped him remember how to care. Outside, she could hear Joe talking with the marshal, arrangements being made to transport Gerald and process the evidence. "It's really over?" she asked James quietly. "Gerald's part is." He set Emma down gently. "But a lot of families lost their land to him over the years. Marshall will need your help making things right." Sarah thought of Thomas's dreams for their ranch, of the life they'd planned. "Our home needs rebuilding." James met her eyes. "If you want help with that." The offer hung between them, heavy with meaning. Emma looked from one to the other, hope bright in her young face. "Can we stay with Mr. James, Mama? Please?" Before Sarah could answer, Davis returned with Joe. "Mrs. Matthews, need you to sign some statements." "Ghost." He caught himself. "Mr. Hawkins, like to deputize you temporary, help sort out these land claims. Man with your tracking skills could be useful." James stiffened slightly, years of isolation warring with the pull of responsibility. Then Emma slipped her small hand into his, and Sarah saw the moment his decision was made. "Might be time to stop being a ghost," he said quietly. Later, as they watched Gerald Matthews led away in chains, Sarah felt the weight of the past finally lifting. James stood beside her, solid and real, while Emma chatted with Joe about going home to check on Star and the sparrow nest. The marshals. Badge continued its work, processing prisoners and taking statements, but for Sarah, justice wasn't found in its official authority. It lived in the evidence that had survived 18 years, in a brother's final confession, in a lonely man's choice to rejoin the world, and perhaps most of all, it lived in the simple fact that Emma could sleep safely tonight, her wooden horses, arranged on a borrowed windowsill, while those who loved her planned a future bright with second chances. The homestead deed lay fresh and clean on James's table, the ink barely dry. Sarah traced her fingers over their names, written side by side, James and Sarah Hawkins, joint owners. The legal language was simple, but its meaning transformed the cabin from sanctuary to home. "Never thought I'd share this place again," James said quietly, standing behind her. "Wasn't sure I remembered how." Through the open door they could hear Emma in the barn, giving Star her evening brushing while chattering to Lucy about their plans to plant a garden. 3 weeks had passed since Gerald's arrest, and each day brought small changes to the homestead, curtains in the windows, flowers in coffee cans, the sound of a child's laughter. "Having second thoughts?" Sarah asked, turning to face him. James shook his head, a smile softening his weathered features. "About marrying you? No, about deserving this?" He gestured to encompass the cabin, Emma's voice, their shared future. "Every day. Good thing it's not about deserving." Sarah touched his cheek, feeling the roughness of his beard. "It's about choosing, and living with those choices." Their quiet wedding 2 days ago had been attended by Joe, Marshall Davis, and a handful of neighbors who'd begun cautiously reaching out once the truth about Gerald spread. Emma had scattered wildflowers before them, beaming with pride in her new dress, as she watched them exchange simple vows. Now the deed made official what their hearts had already decided. This was home for all of them. A place to heal, to grow, to build something new from the ashes of past sorrows. "Mr. James!" Emma's call from the barn carried excitement. "The sparrows have babies. Come see." James's face lit with the smile he seemed to reserve only for Emma. "Duty calls," he said, pressing a kiss to Sarah's forehead before heading out. Sarah watched through the window as he lifted Emma up to peek into the nest, his strong hands gentle and sure. Her daughter's delight at each new discovery had worked magic on the lonely man they'd found in the wilderness. The ghost of the prairie was truly gone, replaced by a husband and father who grew more comfortable in those roles with each passing day. The homestead itself was transforming. James and Joe had repaired the damage from the firefight, then gone on to make improvements. A proper bedroom for Emma, a larger kitchen, a workshop where James could teach Emma woodcarving. Each change marked their commitment to the future. Sarah unpacked the last of their belongings, brought from the old ranch by Joe after Gerald's arrest. Among them, she found Thomas's old journal, its pages filled with dreams for the ranch and hopes for Emma's future. With tears in her eyes, she placed it on the shelf beside Catherine's Bible. Two treasured memories sharing space in their new life. "Mama!" Emma burst in, eyes shining. "Can I name the baby birds?" "Mr. James says they'll need names once they learn to fly." "I said they might need names," James corrected, following her inside. "After they're bigger. Lucy thinks we should name them now." Emma clutched her doll and the wooden horse, constant companions in all her adventures. "So they know where home is when they fly." Sarah and James exchanged glances, recognizing the deeper meaning in their daughter's words. Home wasn't just a place marked by a deed, it was the certainty of belonging, the knowledge that love waited behind familiar walls. "Speaking of home," James said, drawing something from his pocket, "made this today." He handed Emma a freshly carved horse, its lines flowing with grace. "Thought your collection needed one more." Emma studied the carving with solemn appreciation. "It looks like star. Figured our family's good luck charm deserved a place on your windowsill." Sarah watched Emma arrange the new horse alongside the others. Daniel's old one, the first one. James had given her, the one found in the drawer. Together they told the story of how three wounded souls had found each other and formed something new and precious. As dusk painted the prairie gold, they sat on the porch together, Emma between them, as she pointed out constellations James had taught her. The deed waited inside, its presence a promise of permanence. But the real deed, Sarah knew, had been written in moments like this, in shared meals and gentle teachings, in laughter and healing, in the daily choice to love and trust. James's hand found hers in the gathering darkness, warm and sure. Before them stretched the endless prairie, no longer a place of loneliness, but a landscape of possibility. Tomorrow would bring more changes, more challenges, more chances to build the life they'd chosen together. For now, they watched the stars emerge, three hearts beating in time, while somewhere in the barn, baby sparrows dreamed of flying. The family portrait caught the late summer light, fresh from the photographer's studio in town. Sarah studied the three of them, frozen in time. James standing tall and proud, his hand resting on Emma's shoulder, while Sarah sat beside them, her smile reflecting a happiness she'd once thought lost forever. "Looks right peculiar," James muttered, adjusting his new coat collar. The formal clothing still made him uncomfortable, but he'd worn it without complaint for Emma's sake. "Man's not meant to be captured in a box." "You look handsome," Sarah assured him, touching the photograph's frame. "And it's important to mark the moment, show people who we are now." They were preparing for the harvest social at the newly restored Matthews Ranch, their first public appearance since reclaiming Sarah's inheritance. The territorial court had moved swiftly after Gerald's arrest, returning stolen properties to their rightful owners. Now the ranch would serve as neutral ground, a place for healing old wounds and building new bridges. Emma twirled in her new dress, her wooden horses and Lucy arranged carefully on her dresser. "Will Cousin Beth be there, and Uncle Robert's children?" Sarah exchanged glances with James. Robert's death had left his wife and children caught between loyalty and truth. But Beth had reached out first, bringing her children to meet their cousin, acknowledging the past while hoping for a better future. "They'll be there," Sarah confirmed, along with many other families who lost their lands to Gerald. "It's time to make things right." James buckled on his gun belt out of habit, then slowly removed it. The ghost's weapons weren't needed anymore. Marshal Davis had seen to that, working tirelessly to restore justice to the territory. James's skills now served a different purpose, tracking lost cattle, helping neighbors, teaching Emma to read the land's subtle signs. The ride into town felt different now. People waved as they passed, children called out to Emma, and James no longer tensed at every approach. His reputation had transformed from fearsome to respected, the community gradually accepting the man who'd helped expose Gerald's crimes. The ranch house emerged from the evening haze, lanterns already lit for the gathering. Sarah felt James's arm tighten around her waist as memories threatened to overwhelm them both. Thomas's death, Gerald's schemes, the long road to justice. But Emma's excitement proved contagious as she spotted her cousins playing in the yard. Look how many people came. She bounced in the saddle before James helped her down. Indeed, the yard was filled with families, many of whom had lost homes to Gerald's greed. But there was no bitterness in their greetings tonight, only shared determination to build something better. Beth met them at the door, her eyes bright with unshed tears. "Welcome home," she said, hugging Sarah tight. Robert would be proud to see this. Inside, the house had been transformed. Gone were Gerald's heavy furniture and dark colors, replaced by simple comfort and warm light. The wall that had once displayed Matthew's family portraits now held photographs of all the families connected to the ranch, including their new portrait, pride of place among neighbors and kin. Joe Running Bear appeared at James's shoulder, passing him a cup of coffee. "Strange to see you social," he teased. "World must be ending." "Blame them." James nodded toward Sarah and Emma, but his voice held only contentment. "They've ruined my reputation for solitude." The evening unfolded like a flower, each moment revealing new possibilities for healing. Children played together, heedless of past divisions. Adults shared stories of Thomas, of Robert, of all those lost to Gerald's ambition. Plans were made for mutual aid, with the winter coming on, sharing labor, tools, and hope. Sarah found James on the porch later, watching Emma play tag with her cousins in the dying light. "Having regrets?" she asked softly. "About leaving the ghost behind?" He pulled her close. "No, man can't live on vengeance forever. Catherine and Daniel, they'd want this. Life going on, family growing." The portrait would hang in their cabin tomorrow, taking its place beside older memories. But its true meaning lay in the scene. Before them, Emma's laughter mixing with other children's voices, neighbors becoming friends, love healing old scars. As darkness settled over the land that had seen so much pain, lantern light spilled from the windows like a promise. Inside, families who had once been enemies now broke bread together, their children playing beneath the watchful eyes of the new portrait, proof that even the deepest wounds could heal, given time and trust enough to try. 1 year later, the young oak tree stood proud against the prairie sky, its leaves dancing in the autumn breeze. Sarah watched as James and Emma worked together to secure its trunk, their movements in perfect harmony after months of shared life and love. "Think it'll grow as tall as the cottonwoods?" Emma asked, patting soil around the base. Lucy and her wooden horses sat carefully arranged on a nearby blanket, supervisors of this important task. "Taller," James promised, his weathered hands gentle on the sapling. "Oak's got deep roots, stands strong through anything, once it takes hold." Sarah understood the metaphor. They'd planted the tree to mark their first year as a family, choosing the spot where they'd first seen each other. Through the heat waves of that desperate day, where a lonely ghost had found reason to rejoin the living, and a wounded family had found their way home. "Marshal Davis sent word," she said, joining them by the tree. "Gerald's appeal was denied. He'll serve his full sentence." James nodded. "Unsurprised. Justice finds its way sometimes, just takes longer than we'd like." Emma looked up from her work, face serious. "Like waiting for a tree to grow?" "Just like that, sweetheart." James ruffled her hair, leaving a streak of dirt that made her giggle. "But worth the wait." The homestead had flourished under their care. The barn now housed not just Star, but a small herd of horses, some of them orphaned or rescued, all of them thriving under James's patient training. The garden Emma had dreamed of burst with late harvest colors, and the Sparrow family had grown to fill 3 nests. Inside the cabin, the family portrait hung among others now. Pictures of gatherings, celebrations, quiet moments caught in time. The Winchester still had its place, but it was cleaned less often, needed less. James's hands were more likely to hold tools for building than weapons these days. "Joe's bringing supplies for the new addition tomorrow," Sarah mentioned, thinking of the baby they'd just learned was coming. "Says we'll have it done before winter." "Whole territory's been waiting for an excuse to help," James agreed. "Still, ain't used to that." It was true. The ghost's reputation had transformed entirely, becoming a story of redemption rather than revenge. Children who'd once feared his name now begged for rides on his horses and lessons in tracking. Neighbors who'd whispered about him in fear now sought his counsel and friendship. Emma gathered her toys, carefully settling each wooden horse in its special place on her windowsill. The collection had grown, each piece marking a milestone in their journey together. Birth announcements, harvest celebrations, quiet victories, over lingering fears. "Tell me again," she requested, a familiar bedtime ritual, "about how you found us." James lifted her, his face softening as it always did for her. "Well, there was this brave little girl and her mama lost in the prairie." Heat. Sarah listened to the story she knew by heart, hearing how James shaped the harsh truth into something Emma could understand and learn from. How fear could lead to courage, how loss could open the door to love, how family was something you could choose and build, like the oak tree taking root outside. Later, after Emma slept, Sarah and James stood on the porch in the gathering dusk. His arm around her waist was solid and sure, their bodies fitting together as naturally as breathing. "Sometimes I wonder," she said softly, "if Thomas and Catherine, somehow knew, guided us to each other when we needed it most." James was quiet for a moment, watching the young oak's leaves silver in the moonlight. Might be they did. Might be that's what love does, reaches past death itself to help heal what's broken. The prairie stretched endless around them, but it no longer felt empty. It was filled with stories now, of justice served and grace found, of a ghost who learned to live again, and a family built from the ashes of loss. Their oak tree would grow tall, marking this place for generations to come, its roots as deep and strong as the love that had brought them together. Stars emerged above them, the same stars that had watched over their first desperate meeting. But now they shone on a home filled with warmth and life, where wooden horses stood guard over a sleeping child's dreams, and two hearts beat in time, no longer alone.